Welcome everybody to this new segment of TSB or Todo sobre Bitcoin. Here we'll do more in-depth conversations with interesting guests and seek to do a deeper dive into their minds. Our first guest is John Mccone, philosopher, writer, and overall fascinating individual. Unfortunately, due to technical issues, the conversation had to be cut short and ends rather abruptly. I do hope, as we continue to do more of this, that they will improve in the future. This episode will start with a quick intro by John himself. Thank you for joining me in this adventure, and I give you all John Mccone.
Well, I'm John Mccone, and I wrote a book called Philosophy, the Philosophical Method, where I tried to, where I first developed a theory of knowledge and then went from the theory of knowledge to kind of from there to like a theory of ethics. And then from there, I went to like driving political rights and then economic sort of rights. So I went from sort of knowledge to ethics to politics to economics in my book, The Philosophical Method. And I suppose then in order to promote it, I started a blog that I called Philosophy for the Future, and I just started writing about technology and philosophy and economics, just articles on all of these things. And one of the articles I've written is on cryptocurrencies. I've also written quite a lot of articles on artificial intelligence, and I actually got interviewed by a few people, and I actually got interviewed by a few people. Like the one television interview I got was on Russia Today, which is now banned everywhere. So the one television interview I got is now kind of basically. Well, I think theoretically you can see it if you're willing to, but if you try to click on the link, you'll get a message saying, "Warning: this will take you to a source of misinformation." Sort of. And if you click on the link, sort of all the government agencies will be watching you and that kind of stuff. But if you wish to continue to be observed by all the government agencies and listen to Russian misinformation, go ahead. You can click on this link.
Yes. So I wanted to talk to you about, because this is the second time we're talking, and on the first one there were so many interesting topics. Like, you're a person that's interested in a lot of different things, which I love. And I wanted to talk to you this time more specifically about your thoughts on crypto and artificial intelligence.
Okay. Like, my latest idea of cryptocurrency is the potential to create a automatic self-enforcing constitution. Because Mao Zedong said that power comes from the barrel of a gun, but in reality, one person with a gun isn't that powerful. Real power comes from an organized group of people with the guns. And what organizes an army together? And the answer is money. That's the whole thing that makes an army organized is that soldiers are willing to follow orders. If nobody in the army is willing to follow orders from anyone else, then you don't have an organized force. So ultimately, the thing that causes soldiers to follow orders is that one, they receive money for following orders, and secondly, the generals have the ability to hire and fire them, and then the commanders have the ability to hire and fire the generals, and so on and so forth. The entire military pyramid is based on two things. It's based on salaries and the ability to hire and fire the people on the higher levels of the pyramid of the chain of command have the ability to hire and fire the people on the lower levels of the chain of command. So basically, and that applies as much for the police forces as it applies to the army, as applies to the courts. All the power structures of a government are based on money and the ability to hire and fire and potentially taxes. So I was thinking, if you have like a cryptocurrency network, and then say a particular like NFT let's say you have a cryptocurrency network, you have a transaction fee, which might be considered the taxation revenue. You could even issue cryptocurrency out of thin air. But essentially, you give some people NFTs. You have some kind of constitution that says this particular cryptocurrency run on this network is the legal currency for this state, and then the army kind of gets paid in cryptocurrency, and either it's newly issued cryptocurrency, or maybe it's a cryptocurrency from transaction fees. So like, say everyone in the country transacts and they pay a little bit of a transaction fee each time, maybe like VAT, and then that goes to the army and the police force. And then you have an NFT that there are special NFTs that basically determine who you're allowed to hire and fire in terms of public services. So essentially the public kind of the position of authority depends on you having access to a particular kind of NFT or something like that. And then you could have some kind of then every single person in the country has some kind of voting NFT that gives them the right to vote, to have one vote. And then you can have some kind of process whereby if people don't like their leaders, they can sort of petition to vote them out. And basically, if the petition works, then the leaders who have this NFT that allows them to hire and fire soldiers and generals and all that kind of stuff beneath them, if the people vote in a particular way, the leader's NFT is deactivated. I mean, you can't get rid of an NFT, because an NFT is like a key, but you can change the block. So it's all the way that NFTs react to software is through a lock and key mechanism. So kind of you have the software platform is a lock, and then the leader possesses, the NFT holder possesses the key. So you could have a system where some kind of vote essentially changes the lock, and then you issue a new key to a new person or something like that.
Right. Yeah. You would change like the protocol that the NFT interacts with.
Yes.
Yeah. So it stops interacting with that one, and then you issue a new one for the new person.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
And the thing is, like that something like that. I mean, something like that could potentially be a self-enforcing constitution where, like, literally there is nothing that leaders can do to derail that process. If the people vote them out, they simply lose the ability to hire and fire soldiers and policemen, and then someone else gets the ability. And obviously, ultimately, policemen want to keep their jobs, they want to keep their salaries, and they're not gonna take orders from someone who has, if someone else has the ability to, whether they get paid, if someone else makes the decision as to whether they get their salary, then they're not going to take orders from the last guy who no longer has the ability to get paid their salary. So essentially you have an unstoppable process controlled by computer code that people could just basically unstoppably vote leaders out.
Yeah, that is super interesting, because there's a lot of DAOs now that are forming, and some of them even have the explicit mission of becoming their own country. And if they were going to take that step, they would require some sort of mechanism to employ people like policemen or military if need be.
Another interesting way you could collect taxes in an automated way. A transaction tax is an easy automated sort of system for that literally the program, that the taxation could be like ingrained into the program. And another way could be to have keys to property. So like your house, where all the houses in the country have some kind of a sort of a card reader. So people use a card reader to get into their house, and then and then you could have like some kind of, again, an NFT in your card reader that allows you to enter a property. And the interesting thing about the card reader and the interesting thing about using a wallet with NFTs to get into sort of houses is that you could actually have an unlimited number of keys. So if you own 100 properties, there's just like one wallet with 100 NFTs on it. And if the card reader reads an NFT in your little sort of hardware wallet, then it lets you in. If it doesn't read the NFT, it doesn't let you in. So the same, small hardware wallet could get you into an unlimited number of like houses. Of course, there's all sorts of issues with being hacked and things like that.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the with the governance system. I mean, it's one of those things where you can't do that. Such a system would be impossible to sort of corrupt in a standard sort of horse trading, you scratch my back, I scratch yours way. But maybe a computer hacker could corrupt it. So it would have to be sort of open source, and people have to work really, really hard to make it work. But if you had a system, for example, where you need NFTs to access particular properties, then you could also have a system that you could have the same thing where the locks change, that where the locks change unless you pay property tax. So you pay the property tax and then the locks change, and that would be another source of public revenue, because that's really what a government is. A government is public revenue. That ultimately a government collects taxes and then pays those taxes to public servants, and the public servants maintain the infrastructure and governance system and enforce laws. So you need a taxation system, which the two easiest ones I can think of would be transaction taxes and other things. But I guess even income tax to a certain extent, that when you pay income, if the system I suppose income involves a transaction in some way, shape or form. So I mean, I guess to a certain extent, most taxes you could probably hard code into the system if you wanted.
Yes, because government's main function is to collect taxes, so to keep the infrastructure running. Do you see us moving to a world with no government? Do you think that's possible?
Well, basically, think about how property originates.
Okay.
So the way property originates is it starts with territory. That's what animals have. Animals have territory. So if a robin, how territory works is very simple. A little robin flies over a little patch. He sees there's lots of worms in the patch and wood and enough wood to build a nest, and he thinks, oh, I like this patch. I think I'm going to beat the crap out of any other robin that comes my way.
Right.
And then suddenly he's got territory. Territory is basically the resources that you are willing to beat the crap out of anyone else who challenges you on. Now, the problem with territory is that if a bigger, stronger robin comes along and you try to beat the crap out of him and you lose, then the stronger robin takes the territory and you're left without territory. So how property works, property is actually dependent very much on power and restraint. That's the essence of property, is power, is a combination of power and restraint. So what property is when you have a larger entity that is very, very powerful, that's more powerful than in any reasonable individual criminal could possibly be, that beats the crap out of people who access the resources that you are solely entitled to access on your behalf. And at the same time, that big power doesn't access the resources themselves. So it relies on restraint as well, because of course any power that's big enough to beat up any group of organized criminals that could be trying to take your property will also be big enough to beat up you. So if the big power that's supposed to defend your property wants to just take it for themselves, potentially they can do that as well. And then, but of course, what we often have is a lot of the property stuff comes from consent. So you have the police force is actually the minority of the population, and the majority of the population, they're divided, and the police force is united. But the majority of the population don't unite because they're actually quite happy for the police, for the job the police does. So to a certain extent, the instruments of governance are usually a minority of the population, but they're much, much more organized than the majority. But they do ultimately know at the back of their mind that if they start screwing over the majority too hard and become a real problem for the majority might potentially decide to organize against them. So that's kind of the one check and balance there is. But the thing is that ultimately, to secure your possessions, you need someone who's really powerful, because if a group of 4 people come along with guns to your house, ultimately you're going to have to run away. But the thing is, if you live in a system with governance, you run away, you call the police, and then the police come with even more guns, and they have a shootout, and they arrest them. So that's basically how you restore the right to your property, which you have a title deed to. That's ultimately the issue with property. The ultimate question about property is, say you own a house, and one day you kind of walk in and you see the windows are smashed, and there's a guy watching TV in your house, and the locks are changed, and he says, "Get out of my property," and you say, "No, that's my property." Ultimately, it comes down to the title deed, and then who's going to enforce that title deed? So you need some kind of protection. Like a lot of anarcho-capitalists, so well, private security forces could do this as well. But the thing is, basically, when the private security forces eventually become a government, the private security, there's in a world without, it's almost like, who was the one who said if God didn't exist, we would need to invent him? That you can call the security force that's keeping your property safe any name you want, a private security force, a government, whatever, but the private security force is going to act exactly like a government.
Just labels.
I think a lot of anarchists end up sort of with the same institutions, but they call them kind of different names that fit into their ideology, but ultimately the relationships between people end up kind of similar, because you have you're still at the same issue. You need a big, powerful, trustworthy security force, and it does need to be centralized to basically stop everyone from, stop the bad actors from trying to expand their property. And that security force has to be restrained, has to have enough self-restraint not to sort of take the property for themselves. And then the people who are running that security force, they're not running it for free. They need to, they're doing a lot of work in terms of catching crime and stuff like that. So they need a salary. So then somebody's got to pay them. And you can call that taxes, or you can call it voluntary fees or subscriptions or whatever you want. But the problem's the same. So the underlying organization is going to be the same. But I think enforcing it all with the computer code it's definitely an interesting idea, and I think there's potential for such a system to be more responsive and less corruptible, although there's also potential for all sorts of new problems in that system. But I think it's worth giving it a try and seeing how it works. One thing I was thinking about is that you could almost create a multiplayer computer game with the governance structure, where it's just all happening in virtual reality, and just basically test it to see if anyone can game the system. And then if it works, then you basically, like, you're a virtual person in a virtual country, and you have this virtual governance system. And I guess you just wander around and try and do well for yourself in life and make money, and maybe even rise up through the ranks of government in the video game.
Right, yeah.
But maybe you also try and cheat the system and crack the system and crack the code and all sorts of stuff like that. And see how easy it is to corrupt. And then if it turns out that nobody can use nefarious, cheaty ways to win the video game, then maybe you could, like, just immediately apply the same kind of code in the video game into real life.
Yeah, it would be amazing if we could test everything in some sort of vacuum, where if it goes wrong, there's no repercussions in the real world.
I think you could do this whole thing in a massive multiplayer video game, whether it's like Upland or Splinterlands or whatever. I don't know if anyone would want to play it. It might be really boring.
True.
Maybe some people will play it out of principles, that they believe in the vision of a sort of automated blockchain type sort of system so much that they're willing to spend hours sort of testing it out and debugging it.
Well, some people are trying to do it now in the real world. They're so convinced that they're trying to go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to do this, of course, is to try and get some country somewhere to just reform its entire, just literally incorporate it into its political system, kind of like El Salvador, and even more radically. Because the thing is, ultimately, when it comes down to it, this is about, when we talk about the real world, we're talking about real territory. And if you challenge the territory of a nation state, you're going to go to jail, unless you want to have a civil war.
Right.
In which case, you might live or you might die. I don't know.
True. I've been reading some papers, and some people have been pointing out people that belong to these DAOs that are trying to see how to build a new country. And one of the things they were saying is that if you can get, like, you could basically rent a piece of a country's land, and as long as you agree with the country, we're gonna pay you this amount of money to keep this land, and you just don't bother us, and we don't bother you, and we give you money for it. And they're saying that if you look for countries that are not doing well economically, you might be able to reach an arrangement.
There's several. I'm pretty deep into this space myself. There's several. What was it? The Startup Cities Society. I think there's a few other ones, and then the Seasteading Institute's an interesting one. I'm actually an ambassador for the Seasteading Institute.
Really?
They just want to. Yeah, I am. They want to just go out into international waters, because that's the only part of the earth that isn't claimed by a country. So the idea is that if you go to somewhere that isn't claimed by any country, maybe no one's going to take exception to it. Joe Quirk actually wants to, what Joe Quirk wants to do is he actually wants to register a dedicated seasteading flag, because every ocean going vessel needs to flag itself with a country in order not to be considered a pirate. If you're in international waters, I think maybe you're okay if you're in a national water or something like that. But if you're in, I think if you're okay if you own a yacht, and if you're on a small yacht and you kind of and you stay within the waters of the nation that the yacht's registered in, I don't think you necessarily have to flag it. But I think if you go outside into international waters, you need to fly a flag in order not to be considered a pirate. So if the US Navy sees your boat and it doesn't have a flag on it, I think they might approach it.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know all the details, but anyway, what Joe Quirk wants to do is he wants to register a dedicated seasteading flag with the flag registry, because he reckons it's easier to register a new flag on the international flag registry, which already exists, than it is to start a new country and arrange an international treaty. The problem with arranging international treaties with existing nations is that I think even with the poorer nations, you still need quite a lot of money to be taken notice of. Maybe if you have like £100 million, maybe they take notice of you. But if you got like 2 million or a couple £100,000, they wouldn't give you the time of day, even a poor country, I don't think. But there are definitely people who are trying to set up cities exactly like you say. Mark Fraser is one of them. I think Mark Fraser is one guy, and then who else? There's a few names come to mind.
Yeah, I'm a part of a DAO called Sovereign, and one of the objectives they have is to build the first Bitcoin nation. And it's quite interesting.
I'd recommend that you join the Seasteading Institute.
Okay, I'll definitely check them out.
You should definitely, if you're interested in forming a new nation, you should definitely join the Seasteading Institute and become an ambassador, because the Seasteading Institute, they basically want to help people to found new nations in international waters. And I think generally it's probably, politically speaking, there's certainly advantages. You can think of certain advantages with starting a nation on the water in terms of just not getting into being just a little bit less likely to get into fights with existing nations with existing territories.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason you have to limit yourself to that approach, but it is another parallel approach. It's difficult to form a new nation, so it's kind of the two peaceful approaches are basically pay a nation off who already has territory, or sort of start a nation in somewhere where no other nation has claimed the territory. But even like the Seasteading Institute are also interested in starting acquiring a host nation that is willing to let you set up a country in their exclusive economic area. And again, the idea there is that okay, you do need, if you're in an exclusive economic area or something like that, you do need to arrive in an agreement with the host nation, but maybe there'll be less it might be less controversial to establish in the waters as opposed to on their actual land.
Yes, and given how much, like, if you could build a city in the water, there would be so much more room for everyone.
Yeah, but what was I going to say? I actually what was it? Henley and Partners did were having a meeting in London, and I let Joe Quirk know about that, and apparently he managed to meet I managed to meet the actual heads of state of several very small island nations. It's not like the heads of state of a big nation, but the heads of state of very small island nations. But the thing about small island nations is the land is very, very small, but there are certainly very small islands with very small populations that actually have an enormous amount of water around them. So that's and if they're a small island, they're probably not capitalizing on all their water. So a really small island, like find a really small island with a population of like less than 100,000, maybe somewhat poor, and then sort of and then offer them some money for some piece of sea that to have autonomy in some piece of sea that they're not even using.
Yeah, no, I love that there's people that are thinking these things now, and they're starting to see how to build a new country. I think that's fascinating.
You should, if this is something you're interested in, you should absolutely join the Seasteading Institute. This is literally something they've been thinking about for over a decade. They've been looking into it, so they've got a lot of experience. In fact, I think almost everyone who's like really working on starting sovereign countries knows about the Seasteading Institute, and maybe I think some of them have even been inspired by the Seasteading Institute.